Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection and a sense of belonging, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about sensitivity and the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. The creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, I'm so glad you're here today. This was kind of a fun interview. I interviewed my husband, Steve. We got a little tense with each other before we started to record, but we talk about what our concerns were and what was coming up for us. I think that's really one of the blessings that we have about our relationship. So this is kind of our origin story of what was going on before we met, how our relationship unfolded. And we do talk about some of the differences that we have being an HSP, for me, a highly sensitive person, and him having some sensitivities, but not necessarily meeting the full criteria for being a highly sensitive person. We are going to be doing a second episode where we talk a little bit more in depth about how we navigate some of the differences in our relationship, but we do touch on it in this episode. I was a little afraid I'd get triggered while we were talking, and I didn't, which is a good thing. But we talk about how we met, what our perceptions of each other were. Just Steve was kind of always there in the backyard, kind of seeing me go through my whole life. And then I was feeling like I was so flawed that no one would ever want to be with me. And then I came home from my trip to Europe with Laura, and he told me how he felt. So I don't want to say too much about it, but I really think it's a good episode. It's really hard recording these introductions right after we do an episode. I really just don't have enough time to think and process about it. The other thing is that I have a new editor, and so the gift of having an editor is he can do fun things like this. This. Hey there. This. Hey there. Hey there. This. And it's been really nice to be freed up to have time to work on the other projects, so I really can be of more service to you, the listener, and providing content that's going to be helpful for you and not spending as much time doing the behind the scenes work with the editing. So it's been really wonderful having the gift of having someone to edit these podcasts. So why don't we just go straight to the show? Hey, Steve, welcome.
Hi.
We're both kind of nervous. We got a little just minor crabby with each other as we were setting stuff up. So I just want to be totally transparent. I think I'm feeling nervous about a couple of things. That this story is really personal because it's our story. And then can I deliver a good story and weave in how this relates to being an HSP and how we navigate in our relationship? And I think too, I'm having like a little bit of fear, like what if you say something that really upsets me, and then and since I'm not doing my own editing, having to trust that I'm going to know whether I want to keep it in or not. What's going on for you?
Well, I suspect I will say something that's going to upset you based on 20 years of experience.
I think it's been almost 22 now.
Yeah,
huh?
It actually has. We're coming up on 22. Yeah. But I mean, we've talked about this before this moment right now. Mm-hmm. So hopefully there's not going to be too many surprises or eyebrow rising moments.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is we seem to navigate through things, and so we'll just deal and get through it. So do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
No.
But I think you have traits of being highly sensitive.
Well, I think everybody does.
But like when it comes to things around animals, like you cannot tolerate seeing animals being hurt. You don't like dog stories.
Yes.
And when we put down our last dog, you didn't want to get another dog because that loss is just really hard for you.
Yes, it is.
Or for me, I can't imagine not having that love and connection again. So while the loss is really hard, as Steve is looking at Gracie girl who's sitting on my lap here. So I think that's a very strong area of sensitivity. Does it make you a highly sensitive person? No, but I think you have traits.
Well, I'm definitely sensitive in certain things, but I don't think it falls within the categories of being an HSP.
Right. But during high school, most of your friends were women. Women
Yes.
love you.
Yes.
And I think that you have more, I think at work, more of the women gravitate towards you to talk to you because you're very empathic, you're compassionate, you're a great listener.
Yes.
So I don't think you have any sensory issues.
Like, give me an example.
Crowds, noise,
No,
fabrics, textures, none of that stuff. I think you're a deep thinker in some ways.
In some ways, yes.
And I think when it comes to animals and like our kids, I think you're a deep feeler. But I think you can talk to anybody about anything, anywhere, all day long. You have this amazing gift. And like, I'm just like, you know. I have good social skills, but you can talk to anybody about anything.
Yeah, and it's just to me, it's a simple thing. I don't see it as a particularly strong skill set. It seems kind of common sense just to carry a conversation going and find interest in what they're saying, not thinking about what I want to say.
Yes, and this is how we're wired differently.
Yes.
And this is kind of like the thing about directions and driving places, which...
Yeah, I know.
You know, which I don't understand why like I think about where am I going to go and how am I going to go? And like, you get in, like, one of the things that's funny is like, if you want to see if a place is open, you'll just drive there. And I'm like, what a colossal waste of time. You know, you have no problem just getting in the car, driving across town to see if a store is open, where I'm like, let's call, let's check it out. So we're wired in very different ways.
We are.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about what led up to our meeting, sort of how we met and how our relationship unfolded. And if we can weave in some of the traits of sensitivity. And then if this doesn't cause a major blow up, then we're going to do a second episode that's going to focus more on some of the differences that we have with me being a highly sensitive person and you not. Okay. Yeah. So Steve and I were both married before this marriage. And so I had just separated from my husband and I was struggling with food and some depression. I went to the employee assistance program, dreading, this is, as a therapist, this is a terrible thing to say, that he was going to suggest that I return to counseling. And instead, that employee assistance therapist counselor suggested that I go to Overeaters Anonymous. So that's how Steve and I met. The first meeting that I went to, you were at that meeting, and I actually happened to notice if you had a wedding ring on.
Yeah, I never knew that.
Yeah.
Wow. Wait, so I met you at your very, very first OA meeting?
I'm pretty sure.
Because you talked.
At my first meeting?
Well, okay, you talked, and that's when I remember seeing you for the first time.
Huh.
So I guess you and I had been coming to the meeting prior to this, and you noticed me, but I didn't notice you.
I'm not really sure, but I think I sat behind you at the very first meeting that I went to. What was your impression when you first met me?
That there's a lot of substance and there's a lot going on in your mind. You know, you're a deep thinker, deep processor, a great communicator. And I don't remember what you said, but it really grabbed me. And I really found it interesting. And the way you communicated really, really got my attention.
My guess is back then I probably shared pretty vulnerably. I joke saying that I'm the poster child for vulnerability. And this is probably back in 1990, 1991.
Yeah. I remember coming up to you after the meeting and you and I were talking. And again, I remember you were looking right at me, right in the eyes. And I really felt that I had your attention and you're listening to what I was saying. There was just a lot of substance behind the words you were saying.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you were married at the time, and
Yes,
I was coming out of a marriage. We didn't talk about saying this. Can I mention the other?
Well, you can't start by saying, can we say this, and then not say it.
Well, you always say that. I have an editor. The editor can take it out.
All right, go ahead, say it.
By the way, listeners, this is how most of our conversations go. I ask if I can ask. He puts up a fuss, says he can't retract. I'm like, yes, you can. And then we go ahead. So we also went to Codependence Anonymous. And I think you had a meeting that you were going to, and I don't know if I found it and we saw each other there. I don't recall how that came together.
I don't remember either.
Yeah. But I had parties, I had just separated. I was making new friends through Overeaters Anonymous. I was building a community. And so we were often in the same circles. I was friends with your ex-wife. And we were really mindful. I mean, I would call you a lot at work because I was in the process of separating. It was a very confusing time. You were really supportive, but I don't feel like we ever did anything that was flirty. I think I had a meeting at my house, and if you came and we were the only ones there, like we wouldn't hug, we wouldn't touch. We were really mindful about keeping, at the time, what we felt were healthy boundaries. In retrospect, we had a really high level of emotional intimacy, like without talking about anything that was inappropriate or sexual or suggestive, just the level of intimacy that we had in talking about what was going on with ourselves. We've said now, like in our current marriage, if either one of us did that with anybody else, like that would not be okay.
No way, not at all.
But at the time, we honestly felt like we were being incredibly respectful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell a little bit about, because we live close to the Naval Medical Center, or at the time where I lived was a little house close to the Naval Medical Center in San Diego. And what would you do on your breaks?
Well, yeah, I was stationed at the Naval Medical Center, and during the breaks I would run, and I would run past Patricia's house, which wasn't too terribly far away. And I would leave little smiley faces out of little rocks and pebbles, and I would put little branches and leaves just for hair or something like that on her doorstep. Or I would put the the infinity sign, the sideways 8, on her front door.
With little rocks that you found.
Yeah. And I would do push-ups and sit-ups on her grass. And it was a way for me to get close to you.
And I'd love it. I'd come home and I'd have these cute little signs and stuff that were from you. And it's interesting, as we're talking about it now, looking back, I'm thinking like, maybe that wasn't so appropriate. But honestly, at the time, I don't think that we saw anything wrong. And I think it's fair to mention that your marriage at the time was really not a great marriage.
No, it really wasn't. It didn't have a strong foundation to begin with. And we were just kind of growing in opposite directions.
Yeah. And I know for me that I felt like you saw a pretty unedited version of myself because, after I separated from my husband, we would start dating and things would be good and then they'd get bad. And then I realized that we hadn't fixed anything. And then I'd go kind of, I was sort of cycling through this grief and separation and, then thinking we could make it work again. And it just didn't work. My house was dirty. You'd often come over and I'd still be like in my pajamas. I mean, I was always covered and dressed appropriately, but you really saw a very unedited version of who I was because of the proximity that you were. Yeah. So we didn't know back then that I was a highly sensitive person. Knowing what you know now, did you notice any traits of me being a highly sensitive person back then?
I think so, though I couldn't label it HSP. But I knew that you were, I know this is kind of a blanket phrase, but sensitive. I knew you were sensitive. I remember one time my ex-wife and I were at a party at your house. I think might have been your birthday party. And I walked past your bathroom and you and one of your friends were in the bathroom and something happened and you were crying. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. And you really, back then I always knew that you felt things at a very deep level. As a non-HSP person, I looked at it as something that you got triggered by things that most people don't get triggered by.
Well, you're probably right. We're 20% of the population. So I think that's an accurate statement.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this since we've been married, that the family that you grew up in didn't really express feelings, didn't talk about feelings. And I have an incredibly rich emotional life. So there's a part of me that sometimes thinks that, you got to kind of live vicariously through me because I sometimes have enough feelings and emotions for both of us.
Yeah.
So I think that and what I love about you is that you're so stable for me that I can have a lot of emotions. It doesn't throw you. It doesn't overwhelm you. And you're really grounding for me. So it's a nice pairing. And I think it's also something that bothers both of us when things aren't going well. I know for me that sometimes like I want you to get more upset when I'm upset because like I kind of want you to join in my upset, which, it's like if you change it on a whim to satisfy me, you'd have to be changing every day in a different way because it's not realistic. But I think it's really common that the traits that we are drawn to on our partners are also the things that drive us crazy. So, I mean, how is it for you? I'm sure my being very sensitive and being a deep feeler has got to be hard on you sometimes.
Sometimes it is, but it also diffuses a lot of tense moments because you'll be very vulnerable and forthcoming about how you're feeling. Geez, I'm really feeling angry when you did this, or I'm really feeling, hurt when you said this. And it allows me to kind of communicate in the same way. Because it takes a lot of the, I don't get as defensive. I don't need to lash back because you're being honest with how you're feeling. It's a lot easier for me to be honest with how I'm feeling. And that just diffuses a lot of the tension or anger that I'm feeling.
Yeah, you've always had a really amazing capacity to not get defensive and responsive. And I say some pretty, I'd say brutally honest. I don't think I'm unkind, but some pretty brutally honest things to you. And it doesn't seem like, we have upsets. It's not like we have a perfect marriage, but those things don't seem to trigger you.
Sometimes it does. I just don't let you know.
Well, yesterday, do we want to talk about what happened yesterday?
Sure. Yeah.
So we had to drop my car off to get some work done on it. And so we took separate vehicles to drive to where we dropped the car off. And I was following Steve. And this is an ongoing thing, like location, direction, navigation. For the most part, it's really a strength of mine. And Steve will get in the car and be driving somewhere. We've had this conversation like, how far do I let him go before I say like, where are you going? And sometimes he has a thought in mind and sometimes he doesn't. And if it's a place that I want to get to on time, then I will say something. But sometimes it's just like, I don't want to. And so we've driven pretty far out of the way until you realize like, oh, heck, where am I going? So we started, and so I'm very judgmental about this. I'm looking at your face, so I feel like I have to say like, I'm very judgmental about this. So we get in the car and I have an idea of, I think is the most efficient way to go. And he goes another way. I'm like, I get really mad. I woke up in a great mood. This is 7:00 in the morning. And all of a sudden I'm really up. And so I called like, where are you going? It's like, this is how I was going to go. Okay. So I'm following him, but I'm really starting to stew about it. And Laura Carr and I video chat a lot. So because we're in separate cars, I was chatting with her and just talking myself through it. Like, I'm really upset. I'm really angry. I'm really judgmental. Like, do I want peace or do I want, to be right? Well, apparently I wanted to be right because like, I just could not let this stuff go. And so I was able to talk it through in this video chat with Laura until I was able to, say like, in the big scheme of life, this is taking me a few minutes and a few miles out of the direction that I want to go. And it's really an okay thing. But I, out of nowhere, got incredibly reactive. And it also triggers this fear for me. And this is totally my fear that, one of us is going to get dementia. One of us is going to lose our minds. You and I have a very different way of organizing. In some ways, I'm incredibly detailed. And in other ways, like I'm just not, and the same thing for you, but because we make a really good fit together, it works out well. But what my strengths are not always your strengths and what your strengths aren't mine. So when I get into this fearful place, I'm like, holy cow, like he's losing it. He's not thinking. So it's not only the issue about, did you think about where you're going, but it's the fear that comes up for me around, I'm going to have to take care of you. You don't know what you're doing. It's a very spirally place that I go to, and it happens pretty frequently. So by the time we got to drop the car off, I was fine, but we did talk about it. And I feel really bad because I was being very candid and it sent you into kind of a shame spiral.
Yeah. I just sensed when I got to the auto mechanic, you were already there. So yes, your way to get there was shorter.
But I went the same way that you did.
I thought you went on 805.
No, I didn't.
Oh, because I never saw you behind. I never saw you.
No, you got through the signal to get on the freeway. Like I got there and you were already ahead of me.
Then how did you beat me?
I have no idea.
All right. So when we got to the auto mechanic, I just sensed that she was upset. And my feeling was right. And I'm thinking, come on, you got to be kidding me. It's just getting to this auto mechanic and, you maybe beat me by a minute. Come on. We know how to get there. So we talked about it. And then what happens for me is, so we dropped the car off. We went to breakfast. We're leaving breakfast. We had to go to do a couple errands. So we're going to the department store, and I didn't make the correct turn into the department store parking lot. Instead, I went down to the next road and then got to the parking lot. But by this time, I'm thinking, shoot, she's angry at me, frustrated again because I made a wrong turn. And then when I'm in the parking lot, I'm looking for the perfect parking space because I don't want to upset her. So while part of me does get a little frustrated and angry that you're so freaking sensitive, that's just kind of
it's our joke. Yeah. So that's not, so if you're listening and that sounds offensive, it's totally not. That I did a video a while ago about how I disturb Steve when I walk into the back room with my shoes on at night. And in this video, I'm saying about Steve, I'm going, you're so freaking sensitive. And then I kind of had this mirror held up to me like, oh, that must be how he sees me. So in our family, saying you're so freaking sensitive is a joke. It's not meant to be offensive. So if anybody has their hackles up, we're good with it.
So I knew you were going to react. I knew you were going to have a reaction. I mean, in my mind, I was sure you're going to have a reaction that I missed the entrance into the parking lot. I didn't get the perfect parking spot. So I pulled up and I asked you about that. And you said, well, to tell you the truth, I wasn't even thinking about it, which gave me a little bit of a reality check that sometimes I'm reading into things too much about your being an HSP.
Right, yeah. Right. And we had processed through, like, I felt really bad that you had a shame spiral about my reaction about taking the wrong way. Really, by the time we got there, I don't think I definitely was not, for me, I wasn't upset anymore. When we talked about it, I'm obviously very colorful in my descriptions about how I react to things, but it did trigger a shame spiral for you that I felt really bad about. And we talked about that. Mm-hmm. And when we did the second errand, like, it wasn't even on my radar. And so this is where that example of if you tried to figure out what was going to please me. So like, okay, going from our house to drop the car off, I obviously had an expectation about how you were going to go and got my panties in a bunch over that. But then when we went to do the next errand, I wasn't even thinking about it. And we have this in reverse, that there are certain things that I do when I drive that drive you absolutely crazy. And sometimes it's hard for me to drive with you because I feel like you're being really critical. And other times I'm like, if it bugs you, it bugs you. So we're talking about this because any relationship that you're in is going to have areas of conflict. And sometimes it's going to bug one person. Sometimes it's going to bug both people. And because of the longevity of our relationship, we just kind of know, like, this is just what happens. And sometimes it's more irritating and sometimes it's not as irritating.
Yeah. And I also want to touch on something else.
Yeah.
It has to do with forgetting things and not doing things the right way. And in my brain, you take it to a level 10 by saying I have early stages of dementia, or that's what you were thinking it might lead to. And for me, it's kind of frustrating in that if I forget something, or if she has to repeat something to me, that I'm thinking you're going to see it as a cognitive deficiency on my part, and we need to go see the doctor about it. And we have. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, God, everybody forgets stuff and everybody has to have things repeated to them on occasion. It's not a cause for alarm. And so I have that thought in my head, and I put pressure on myself because I know that's where you go.
Mm-hmm. And my guess is the more pressure that you put on yourself, the worse you function.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Which I'm not saying for you, but as HSPs, like, we don't like to be observed. We don't do well when we're under pressure. So I know just for the general population that if we have that pressure performance, that often makes our performance even worse. And yeah, I would think that would be awful. And it's a hot spot for me. Like I really have this fear of, I'm not going to talk about it here, but early in my life, I did a lot of personal caregiving, and I was in relationships where I was the primary caregiver for people that were not able to provide care for themselves. And that's really hard. And I have this fear that that's where I'm going to end up again. And it scares me. And so I will totally own that that's where I go when you forget things. And this is how we're wired differently. I mean, I also think that all four of us have ADHD, and it shows up really differently. And so the part where my executive functioning shows up that, before we go to the car, like I'm thinking I need to get my keys out. I'm going to be at the car. Back when we wrote checks, I'd make sure I had my checkbook out and would be filling it out. Those aren't things that you plan ahead for. It doesn't mean that you don't function and you don't do them, but because I think about those things ahead of time and you don't, and having this fear, it's like it's a constant trigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Sucks for both of us, huh?
Yes, it does. But somehow we persevere.
Right. And
we talk about it.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of what we're modeling for you. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to have this fear of me having to caretake Steve. I feel like that's a terrible thing as a wife to say. And the truth is, that's my fear. If and when it happens, then I'll deal with it. But there's nothing wrong about saying that. And it doesn't change how we're wired or what goes on. But the fact that we have room to have this difference and to go like, yeah, it kind of sucks for both of us. Those are the ways that we manage.
Yeah.
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 Okay. So you were in town for a few years because you were active duty military back then. And then you moved away. You guys built a house in Northern California. We continued to email each other. And then I think that you called me from Dubai once.
I did. I was stationed here in San Diego. Then I got orders to Central California. And I found myself then deployed overseas. And we pulled into Dubai, and I had the choice of calling my then wife or Patricia, and I chose Patricia.
Well, didn't your ex-wife at the time change your phone number to an unlisted number while you were deployed?
She did. I didn't know that at the time, though. Mm-hmm. She also changed the locks when I came home.
Yeah.
As a side note.
So I just want to say it's not that I'm entirely a homewrecker. It really wasn't so great on the home front, because I have a little bit of embarrassment about sharing this publicly. I feel like given the circumstances, we did the best job that we could, but it's not like you were in this great happy marriage and I came in and busted it up.
Right. Yeah.
So you had a choice of making a phone call.
And I chose you, and we talked for, quite a while.
Yeah, I had to go. I had season tickets with my sister at the Lambs Players Theater, and I think I had to leave to go to a play that night, but I remember talking.
And you were writing me letters. Mm-hmm. Well, we were both writing each other letters.
Right.
Yeah. It was a very pivotal time in our relationship.
Yeah. But I had been in and out of a few relationships during this time, and I would talk to you about the relationships that I was in.
Yes.
You knew several of the people that I had dated. So we just had what felt like at the time, just a very good friendship that we didn't talk about us being together. Like I said, we weren't flirty. There was nothing suggestive. It was just a really supportive relationship with a lot of emotional connection.
Mm-hmm. But I did change things up a little bit. Very subtle changes that I don't know if you're aware of.
In what way?
The letters.
Say a little bit more.
So we would write letters, and then I would always just end it with Steve. Or
you started to say Esteban.
Steve. No. Then I changed it to love Stephen.
Oh.
Yeah. Again, I just wanted to I wanted to be known by Stephen, by only you. And I wanted to throw in the word love.
Did I ever say anything about it?
No, I don't know.
I don't think I noticed. Or if I noticed, it wasn't a conscious noticing.
Right.
Yeah, because in my mind, we were still friends. So this kind of leads up to where I stopped with the episode with Laura Carr when we didn't talk for 20 years, that I finally graduated. It took me 14 years to get my bachelor's degree. And I took myself to Europe for 3 weeks to travel with Laura. And I came back feeling like I am so messed up that I am never going to have a relationship again in my life. Like I just was feeling really deficient and broken. And I came home and found a letter from you when I got home from Europe. Do you want to say a little bit about the letter?
Well, I first of all, I want to talk about when you went to Europe.
Okay.
Because when you went to Europe, I was convinced that you'd come back changed and there would be no room in your life for me. And I was devastated. I think, well, the last time I saw you before you went to Europe was probably just a day or two before you left.
Yeah, it was really funny that even though you didn't live in San Diego anymore, every single time something significant was going on, like the day that I moved from the house that you and I met to another house, you showed up in town. The day that I was moving from that house to go into treatment, you showed up. I mean, it was very interesting and it was purely serendipity.
Yeah, the ship just happened to pull into San Diego during these times. And the last night I saw you before you went to Europe, I cried like a baby.
I didn't know that.
I cried like a baby. I had to pull over because I was crying so hard. Because I was convinced that when you were going to come back from Europe, you were going to be a changed woman and there would be no room for Steve in your life.
Well, two things. You kept saying I was going to meet up with some Frenchie. But I really didn't know. So how did you imagine I was going to change in this trip? What did you think was going to happen?
I'm not really sure, to tell you the truth. I think just the fact that you're going overseas to Europe and your mind was going to expand, you know, all these new experiences. You were going to see lifestyles that you hadn't seen before. And when you'd come back, you would want to embrace that kind of lifestyle, those things that you saw.
Huh. Because I'm thinking this is after I went into treatment, and I was in treatment for 9.5 months. And I just remembered that when I went into treatment, it was residential treatment. You sent me a cassette tape with, I didn't know what was on it. And the rule in the treatment center was for the first 30 days, we didn't get mail or have contact from anybody from the outside. But staff allowed me, like I had a Walkman. Yeah, that's dating it, huh? I had a Walkman and they allowed me to keep the tape in my room, but I wasn't allowed to listen to it for 30 days. So you sent me this thing that I had no idea what it was. And being the good girl rule follower I didn't listen to it. It wasn't until we took a trip to Palm Springs that I was allowed to listen to it. And so why don't you say what was on the tape?
Well, it took me, I thought about the tape for probably close to a year. And it probably took me 3 or 4 months to get what I thought were the perfect songs on this tape. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was really looking towards your being an HSP.
Without knowing that's what it was.
Without knowing it, as I'm looking back now, because these songs were very thought-provoking. They were a bit some love songs, some storytelling songs about relationships that meant a lot to me. And these stories and these songs were a lot of how I looked at Patricia and I.
What were some of the songs that were on there? I'm a little, I know you're rolling, you're doing the big eye roll now.
I don't, for as much as I said this was important to me.
Oh, I thought for sure you were going to be like, I can't believe you don't remember. That's
sorry.
What I thought.
I don't remember. The only song I remember, which did not fit at all, I just wanted to throw it in there, was that bluesy song with the chainsaw. It actually had a chainsaw in as part of one of the musical instruments.
The song by Extreme was in there.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it was.
I remember that. I remember liking the music.
Yeah. I think they're really all good songs.
Yeah. Okay, so I came home and I got this letter from you. So tell us about the letter.
Yeah, the letter. So I was overseas and my good friend, I had been talking about you by this time it was 5 months into our 6-month deployment. And I had been talking about you to my good friend on the ship. And we were approaching Hawaii, which was our last port before coming back home. And he said, you know, Steve, you've been talking about Patricia for all this time. You need to write her a letter exactly how you feel. And that's what I did. I remember a couple parts of the letter is that I wanted to show up at your door and I want to take you on a date and I want to kiss you good night after the date. I also wanted to take you to the happiest place on earth.
Yep. And we did.
And we did.
When you came back in October of 95. And we'd been friends all this time. So I never really, in spite of the emotional intimacy that we had, I really didn't entertain ideas of having you as a boyfriend. And I remember having, pictures because you'd been at birthday parties and we had mutual friends of like looking at the pictures and going like, am I attracted to you? Like it was a mind shift of somebody that you're friends with. But for me, I hadn't entertained the idea of a romantic relationship with you. So I remember like staring at your picture, like, am I attracted to you? Could we be boyfriend and girlfriend? It was different. And I remember crying when I came home because you had seen all the parts of me that felt were totally unacceptable. You'd seen me go through a divorce. You'd been to my house when it was messy. I'd talked to you about all the problems that I had. So all these parts of me that felt really defective that no one would ever want to love, you had seen them because I wasn't hiding them from you. Like I would hide those from people that I dated because I wanted to look good for my dates. But you had really, the phrase that I used is, you'd been in my backyard all these years that you had seen everything, which gave me an incredible sense of peace and comfort because there wasn't anything about me that you hadn't seen and you still loved me and wanted to be with me.
Yeah. Those perceived negative things about you, it wasn't even on my radar. I wasn't even a thought deep in my mind about these things. I just knew that I was taking a chance by forever changing our friendship. But I also remembered that, the old saying, regret is like the strongest thing you can live with. If I didn't take action on it, I'd regret it for the rest of my life.
Sure. Well, and if you take that narrative that I have about being too much and too needy, that I don't think I ever felt that with you because we often would talk daily. I would call you in the morning when you were at work. I'd be crying about the breakup that I was going through and I never ever, like you just were such a loving, when I say container, I don't mean that in an objectified way, but you were just able to really hold and embrace everything about me and my intensity. And I never had that feeling of being too much or being too needy. And that was so healing to me because that, as you all know, that's a pretty big wound of mine. Mm-hmm. So you came back to San Diego and we started dating and it was so easy, especially having been in this really tumultuous relationship. I was married for 4 years. I knew my first husband growing up. He's 5 years older than I am. And when things were good, they were really good. But when they were bad, oh, Lordy. And a lot of it was me. I mean, I really had a lot of growing up and maturing to do. But I've always been amazed at, comparatively speaking, how easy our relationship has been.
It really was. And I think it was because we had that friendship foundation. I mean, we knew each other very, very well going into an intimate relationship. We weren't learning about ourselves as most relationships evolve, which I think was a great way to bring our relationship up to the next level.
Well, I think too that you're really stabilizing. You're not reactive. You're very calm. I would think in some ways, because you tend to not like conflict, I think you probably didn't make a fuss over a number of things because it's more important for you to have peace. I'd like to think that over the years, we've gotten better about talking about some of those things. And it is sometimes a challenge. A couple of weeks ago, we went out to lunch and we were talking about what we wanted to talk about on this episode. And I didn't even realize it, but I got triggered. And as the day went on, I was having a reaction. And I thought, if I say anything that you're going to come back and say, like, this is why I don't want to talk to you about things. And that evening I was pretty upset. And fortunately, Laura and I were able to take a walk. And so I was able to talk about it. By the time I got back, I almost wish that I hadn't said anything to you because I was able to understand what had come up for me. But I came home and we had a really, really good talk. But I think that's one of the fears that comes up about when we talk about things, that there's still things that I get triggered and I've got shame about. And when they come up, like I end up having a reaction and it will often affect me energetically, that I get tired or I get a headache or I need to go, kind of what I do when I get overwhelmed is I like to go to our bedroom and read or watch Netflix. I kind of need some quiet time. And I've just gotten to the point where I accept that that's what happens for me, but it's hard. Like I want to be able to show up to the day all day. And sometimes energetically things just get to me.
Yeah.
But we seem to be able to work things through.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I spent probably the next, let's see, you came back in 95. We didn't get married till 97. I spent that whole time we were dating. And even when we were corresponding, I was in therapy with the therapist that Laura and I talked about. And this is where there was a great strength that I continually processed and shared, because if I was going to get married again, I really wanted to make sure that it was a healthy relationship, that I didn't recreate patterns. And I worked really closely with the therapist this whole time to evaluate patterns of communication and how you were showing up and how I was showing up. And I feel so grateful for that, because I really feel like our marriage has been, for the most part, pretty easy.
It has. Pretty fulfilling. Yeah, pretty easy.
Fulfilling?
Very fulfilling.
I want to tell a story about when you made me dinner once when we were dating.
Okay.
So Steve wanted to make dinner. I was living in this apartment in Mission Valley. And so he went to steam the zucchini, but he actually got cucumber and steamed cucumber and didn't realize that it was a cucumber and not a zucchini.
They look very similar.
They do look very similar. So let's see. We started dating, and then I went into the house. I think being in a relationship started to trigger stuff for me. I'd been in the house. I'd been in treatment. We started to date. And then being in a relationship started to bring up issues for me. So I went back into treatment for a couple of months.
Right.
And we were able to see each other. And then that time, you had gotten an apartment and you had taken my things out of storage, because when I got out of treatment, we were going to live together, but you got all my stuff out of storage and set up house while I was in treatment.
Right. Yeah. And that was kind of a tough time for me, because, again, much like your European trip, I didn't know how much you were going to change through the treatment. I was concerned that what we had between us, you would see wasn't strong enough. It wasn't real. You know, I had all these kind of extreme thoughts going on with my head.
I think that's pretty common that, if people go away on a retreat or they go to take a course or they go to therapy, that I think there's that fear of, something's going to change and the relationship is going to totally be over. So that makes sense. So I got out of treatment. We lived together. It was pretty smooth. We went to Laughlin. I think I only went to Laughlin with you once.
Twice.
I went twice?
You're a great wife.
Not so much anymore.
I don't know. I think I have a better time without you, honey, in Laughlin than I do with you. So
it kind of makes me feel better. Like, it takes the pressure off. Because you go twice a year. You go by yourself once, and then during the summer, you usually go with your best friend.
Right. Yeah.
Laughlin just doesn't do it for me.
Yeah.
But when we made this trip to Laughlin, there's a store there called Ring-O-Rama. And I bought, this faux diamond engagement ring, and it was getting close to Christmas. And you left your marriage with an incredible amount of debt that you wanted to get out of. And I wanted you to ask me to marry you. And I was a brat. And I think the night before Christmas Eve, I didn't go to bed all night because we had talked about getting married and you wanted to get out of debt. You wanted to buy me a proper ring. And I'm like, well, we have the Ring-O-Rama ring.
Right.
And I was bratty. I was pouting about it. And so on Christmas Eve, what happened?
We went to a restaurant, a very hoitsy-toitsy Italian restaurant.
Okay, so I have to interrupt.
Oh.
So this is where like Steve goes to the filing cabinet in his head and he's like, let's pick a fancy type of restaurant. It was a French restaurant. But this is where the details drive me crazy. Like, he goes in his head to like, it was a relative, it was an aunt. No, it was an uncle, it was a cousin. So this is where like it drives me crazy. And we just process differently. But
all right, so what have I gotten wrong so far?
It was a French restaurant.
What did I say?
Italian.
Oh, okay. Sorry. It was a very, very French restaurant. The maitre d' was a bit snooty, and I was feeling a little uncomfortable because it's just not it's not the kind of environment that I wanted to propose you at.
And I didn't know you were going to propose, and I was exhausted because I didn't go to bed the night before because I was up pouting.
Yeah.
Being the delightful wife material that I am.
So we left that restaurant and we went to Planet Hollywood. Complete different atmosphere, but a much more relaxed, for me, a much more comfortable atmosphere. So we had dinner, and then what I wanted to do was I got together with a waitress, And when she would bring the dessert tray out to us, I wanted the ring mixed in with the desserts so you would see it. But the waitress said, no, wait a minute. We have a live mic. And we have a DJ here. We have a live mic. I'm going to give you the mic and you can propose to her.
And they had a camera with video. So it, showed throughout the whole restaurant. We were on video.
Yeah. And that's what I did. I proposed. And I will say that I found myself in a very, this is going to sound bad, enjoyable, satisfying position, knowing that you were being a brat about me not proposing to you. Because don't forget, I was in love with you for probably 10 years, or 10 years. And, when I first met you, I thought you were too much woman for me, that there's no way you would want to be with me. And now I find myself having this woman in front of me wanting to marry me, which is pretty cool.
We've never talked about this before because I've always felt like that was a really bratty thing of me I feel like I coerced you to propose to me.
I don't remember the chain of events that led up to it. But I don't think I felt coerced or pressured or, manipulated into it. I don't remember when I was going to propose to you on Christmas Eve, but yeah.
Maybe this is why our marriage has lasted so long. So we ended up planning our wedding. Some girlfriends and I, we made all the invitations. I was really into rubber stamping and embossing back then. We decided to have it in our backyard. You had your dog then at the time. The dog was in the backyard. Shoes were optional because I hate high heels. I love how I look in them. They hurt my feet. And to wear, I didn't wear a wedding dress. It was a second wedding. I was barefoot. And so shoes were optional for the wedding. And then you wanted to have it be a
potluck, because nothing brings people together more than a potluck. And you have to understand, these invitations were handmade by you and your friends. And we actually put down at the bottom of the invitation, footwear optional.
Right.
It was in our backyard of a rented house. We had folding chairs. We had folding tables. We had a handmade, relatively simple wedding cake. It was a very informal, though comfortable environment. And I thought, what's better for this environment than a potluck? Come on. It's
funny. This is probably the first time when we've retold this story that I think I can see a little bit more of where you were coming from. But where I was coming from is like, insert eye roll, how tacky, that you don't ask people to bring food to your wedding. But I think after 22 years, I think I have a little glimpse of where you were coming from.
Okay. All right.
Needless to say, it was not a potluck.
No.
But I think that how we did our wedding is very much how we do our life. I think very informally, very casually, this is who we are, come as you are. And we have a couple that we do dinner with every month or every 6 weeks. And almost every time we get together, we're like, if it wasn't you, we would have canceled tonight. I'm just tired or I have exercise clothes on. But because we've known each other for so long, it's just come as you are. And so I never have that pressure of like, we got to get ready and get dressed up and go over to their house. It's just like we can show up however we are. And I think that's really kind of how we are as people, pretty authentic, down to earth.
Yeah. I just had an epiphany.
What's that?
And correct me if I'm wrong, the whole wedding, the way we organized it, the way it went down, I think it was quite an un-HSP evolution.
How so?
Well, it was thrown together on a shoestring budget. It wasn't perfect. There were things that didn't go smoothly, that you could react to as an HSP. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but
I think I was really clear going into it that the goal at the end of the day was to be married. And for me, I think because HSPs often have really high expectations around things, and weddings are certainly one that, you want everything to go off. And like one of the songs, I don't know if it played or it didn't start on time. The minister that we wanted wasn't there. I mean, there were a number of glitches, but because the goal was to be married when it was over, I remember just really enjoying it. I think it was very HSP friendly because I got to have my feet in the grass. The dress that I wore was really comfortable. It was not a traditional dress. It was low key. It was friends. It was small. So to me, I see it as being very HS friendly.
Okay. All right. Okay.
But anyways, so it's only been the last couple of years that I found out that I am a highly sensitive person. And you and I watched the movie Sensitive, the Untold Story together, and we've talked a lot about the traits of being an HSP. What surprised you the most when you learned about the traits of me being a highly sensitive person, and then kind of plugging that back into our life and seeing how that's, I don't know, played out?
Yeah. On the first blush, I thought of a highly sensitive person, and I don't mean this in a bad way, as being sensitive. And we here, in at least in America, have this vision: if you're sensitive, you're weak, you're fragile. Yeah. And I have since learned that, you are not weak, you're not fragile. In fact, I think there's a certain amount of courage and strength to acknowledge you're an HSP. Because like I said, because society looks at it as a weak attribute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know when we were talking at breakfast yesterday about this, one of the things that you said that's changed is just being able to name it has made such a difference in our relationship. And I think it's true. I know that before we would go on vacations or travel, because of my need to organize and wanting to be prepared, I tend to get anxious and then I get irritable. And one of the things, I don't know how it started, but we haven't used it in a long time. I don't think I've been irritable for a long time. And I think this is before I discovered I was a highly sensitive person. But instead of saying I was irritable, we'd call it charming. And sometimes I was very charming. But it gave us a way to name what was going on without making it be a negative thing. But I think there's so much power in naming it. And that was one of the things you were saying yesterday at breakfast, is just being able to talk about things and to put it on the table makes such a huge difference. And I think before I knew, it's not uncommon for me to get headaches or to get tired. And I think there's a difference of saying, do you want to go out and do something that's like, I don't feel well, as opposed to, you know what, I can't deal with that level of stimulation today. It's just too much. That I think that's a whole different thing of dealing with than having to deal with somebody's symptoms around not wanting to go out, as opposed to going like, I just don't have it today. I mean, why don't you say a little bit about that?
Yeah. You mean about going out and limitations and things like that?
More about how it is when we name it.
Yeah. And I didn't really realize this until talking with you. Naming it takes a lot of the energy away from it. It takes some of the mystery out of it. It negates any negative thoughts you had about what's going on. It's just easier, for me, it's easier to talk about, and it's easier to navigate through.
I feel like every single episode I'm talking about this, and I think it's really, really relevant. There's a difference between if you want to go out and I go like, I have a headache, I don't feel well, I need to go lay down. Like, there's nothing you can say about that. What are you going to say? But if I say, you know what, I have a headache, I'm feeling like I'm overstimulated, and I'm just not up for it, like, I'm really sorry. Now we can talk about it, and you can go like, I'm really bummed, like, I really wanted to go out, and I can go like, yeah, I hear that, and I don't like when I've got these limitations. I think then it gives us something to talk about, and we do talk about, you like going out way more than I do, and my energy during the week is spent using a lot of energy where I don't think you get the needs that you met for your kind of extroverted self met. And so on the weekends, you want to go out and do stuff, and I'm really happy to stay home.
Right.
And we've had to negotiate that. I don't know. I kind of feel like I get more of my needs to not go out met than you get your needs to go out met. Is that accurate?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I find myself feeling disappointed or a little bit frustrated.
Mm-hmm. And like yesterday morning, we had talked about going out for breakfast and doing some errands when we dropped the car off. And then I was up at 3:00 in the morning and was really tired. So when you got up yesterday, you said, like, if you want to sleep, go ahead.
Yeah.
And I really did. And knowing that we've been talking about this for a couple of months, like, it was important for me to get up and to honor you and to go out and do some stuff. And we had a really great time. It's interesting. I came home and had a podcast interview, and I don't know what it was, but then I was depleted. Like, I ended up going to the back bedroom. I read for a little while and I napped. Like, it just took it out of me. And I don't know what that's about. I'm not always like that, but that's hard feeling like, gosh, I'm only good for a little bit of stuff and then I have to go lay down and take a nap. And I want to try and find a way to meet your needs and to honor my needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we do a good job with that.
Well, I feel bad because it feels like you're still not getting your needs met and that my needs trump yours.
Yeah, I'm not, and they do. However, we talk about it. And we talk about it without getting defensive, without blaming each other. We're acknowledging it, which I learned to do through you.
Well, and we talked about, we live in South Park, and so there's something called Walkabout that happens every quarter. And Steve loves Walkabout. I'm not crazy about it. I'm more content to go and sit and people watch. The sidewalks are pretty narrow where we live, and so people have their dogs, their strollers. It's, I'm a highly sensitive person. The noise, the crowds, there's lots of music. Not my favorite thing, but I go because I know you like to go. But when we had this conversation, I feel like I'm playing the role of the good wife, but not only does he want me to go, you want me to initiate going, which I hear that that's your desire. You don't think that this is an equivalent thing. It's actually been a long time, but when I used to have to go shopping for bras, yeah, very exciting. I would ask Steve to go with me. It's not your favorite thing to do, but you do it because you love me.
Yes.
But I feel like it would be the same as me saying, honey, I want you to initiate bra shopping with me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That analogy just does not work. There are not a lot of partners out there that would initiate going bra shopping as opposed to going out to a social event where the neighborhood comes out and there's activities and there are people you can talk with, and those are two different experiences that I don't think you can use the analogy for.
But you're looking at it through the lens of an extroverted non-HSP. It's social, it's fun, it's community. For me, kind of close to wanting to poke my eyeballs out.
Come on.
No, I'm serious. Your lens is that this is an enjoyable social activity that everybody would want to go to. And for me, I would be just as content to be at home. Like, I've used up my energy in the areas that are important for me. I go because I love you. I need to be mindful of what I do the day of Walkabout to make sure that I have enough energy reserve so that I can go. But I don't see it as being, it doesn't fill me up. It doesn't satisfy me. It doesn't add to my life. I go because I love you. It's not, there are things that would be much worse, but it depletes me. And so I don't see it as being a really fun, exciting thing. So to me, the analogy of me asking you, like, I want you to initiate going bra shopping with me feels like it's the equivalent, because like, you don't really get a lot out of going bra shopping with me other than the delightfulness of my company.
Yes. All right. Okay.
So for me, I think it's reasonable for you to initiate, or you'll say, like, I know I've been thinking about this, and I don't even want to name it, like Earth Day is coming up at Balboa Park. Again, crowds, people, noise, not my idea of a good time, but you love it. And we haven't been for years.
Right.
Because the pattern is we just don't talk about it. And that kind of works for me. Because I've been thinking like, oh, did we miss it? Feeling kind of bad and a little relieved, hoping that we did.
Yeah.
But I think for you to expect me to initiate going, I don't think that's really realistic. I think, and this has been a challenge in our relationship because you don't pursue what it is that you want. You might say, hey, let's go to Earth Day. And that's a month in advance. And obviously it's not like I put it on my calendar because I'm thrilled about it. But if it's something that's important to you, then I think you need to go like, hey, Earth Day is coming up. Can we go? Hey, Earth Day is next weekend. And I will do my best to do it. But I think for you to have the expectation that I'm going to initiate it.
Okay. Fair enough. Whenever you want to go lingerie shopping, I'm available.
Is there anything else that we want to bring up before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I just think our level of communication is pretty good.
I think it's excellent.
Yeah. And we honor each other's differences. We hear each other's differences without too much judgment.
Yeah. I think we still have more areas that we can grow. I think that there are areas where we'll talk about this, and we're going to do another episode where we're going to talk a little bit more about some more of the specifics of how we navigate our differences. But I'm incredibly liberal. You're incredibly conservative. And we haven't really figured out a way to talk about our differences because it just doesn't work.
Right.
And so I think that there still are areas. And like I'm reflecting back to when we started recording, like, I don't think I got triggered. Like, I think I'm okay. How about you during this podcast episode?
I did not get triggered. No.
Yeah.
No.
All right. Whew. Dodged a bullet. We did it.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show with me. I really appreciate it. Oh, I do have one more question.
What?
So what did you think when I told you I wanted to start a podcast? Do you remember I called you crying?
Yeah.
Because I was afraid that I wouldn't do it or that it would fail and I would fail. And I asked you for permission. Like, if I don't do it, if it fails, is that okay? And you were so reassuring and I was crying in the car.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how has this been watching me do the podcast and what's been surprising to you?
It's been pretty incredible actually watching you and hearing you talk about it, because from where I sit, I think this is an incredibly popular, well-received, well-done podcast. I think you've got a great message to put out. And I think a lot of people hear that message and they relate to it. They're happy you're doing it because now they have a voice. There's a voice out there that is good for them. And this has been great. And you've had a lot of success.
You've been so supportive. I'm kind of tearing up as you're talking about this, but you've been so supportive. And I don't think I could have done it without all of your support. And for me, when I get on something, it's like, it's all I talk about. So when we walk the dog together, everything is always about, the podcast and the guest and this and that.
Yes, that's true.
Does it bug you?
No, sometimes I do get a little bit of overwhelm.
Yeah.
But I know it's important for you to talk about it.
Yeah.
So
I'm a verbal processor.
Yes. Yes.
I've been better about not talking about things at bedtime, though.
Right. Well, I'm not subtle about not wanting to talk it when we go to bed.
I know it's your time to wind down. And sometimes I just want to talk to you about one thing. You're like, and you kind of like sigh and put your book down.
And you always say, okay, the end.
Yeah.
But it is never the end.
And on that note, this is the end. Thanks for being here, Steve. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
All right. I love you.
I love you too.
All right. Bye. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. If you're in a relationship with someone who's not an HSP, I really hope that this has been helpful just to give you a glimpse of some of the ways that we can navigate our differences in relationships. Even when we're in relationships with other highly sensitive people, we still have conflict. We still have competing needs that come up. We still have the need to communicate. So my intention in doing these episodes with Steve is to maybe show some of the ways that we work through some of the bumps. I love my husband. I love my marriage. It's not perfect. We've got challenges. And I think the fact that we're able to talk about it just makes it so much more manageable. If you have any questions, please hop over to unapologeticallysensitive.com. About the time that you hear this, I'm going to be starting some specialty groups for highly sensitive people that are going to be online. I'm now working globally with people doing coaching. So this is a little different than therapy, but it seems like most of the work that I'm doing right now with folks is really about providing education and tools for highly sensitive people to really help them live their best lives and to figure out how to navigate and conserve their energy and to have more joy. So if you want any information, hop on over to unapologeticallysensitive.com. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower.